Hello and welcome everyone to the very first episode of Every Role Matters Roundtable, where we will be discussing mental health issues in gaming with professionals, gamers, and celebs. My name is Fenway Jones. You may know me from Twitter as Fenway the Teen DM, and I am the founder of Jasper's Game Day. We are a nonprofit organization that raises money for suicide prevention and awareness. And today, I have here with me Shareef Jackson, Jasper's resident STEM expert, as well as the DM for Rivals of Waterdeep, Star Trek Adventures on Roll20, and a co-host on the podcast Spawn on Me. On top of all of those cool things, he is one of the advisors on the JGD Board of Advisors, and he is here as our D&D expert for today's episode. Also with us is Dr. April Foreman. April is a licensed psychologist serving the veterans as a deputy director of Veterans Crisis Lines Innovation Hub. She's an executive community member for the board of American Association of Suicidology, and she is very passionate about helping people with severe emotional pain. In particular, advocates for people with borderline personality disorder. She is here as our mental health expert for today's chat. And so I was super excited to have both of you here. Thank you so much for joining me today. In this episode, Shareef, April, and I are going to be discussing role-playing in the gaming and mental health sense, how role-playing can help with acceptance of oneself and others, with personal and interpersonal issues, and help people to find themselves. So let's jump right in. Shareef, in your experience, how does role-play help with people accepting themselves and other people?
I think it helps in so many different ways. I just think as people, this is kind of outside of gaming, but just as like humans, we do a lot of role playing in general, whether as the kids or like adults. Like a lot of people, when they go to work, they're like a different person than when they come home. You might be different roles around different people. You might code switch, like speak different ways. So like role playing is like a way that we all interact with the world. Right. I think in terms of people accepting themselves, I think one great thing about role-playing games, specifically tabletop games, is that you can be in a place, obviously assuming you're at a good table with good people, where you can be vulnerable and you can like say, act, and do things without fear of judgment, which is something that not a lot of us experience in other aspects of our life. It's kind of sad to say, but like it's real, right? So I feel like it's a great place to examine and experiment with different ideas, with a different, with like different ways of like a problem solving. I know that I've like talked to other folks that have really gotten like pleasure in like experiencing playing as different genders or different sexual identities. So like it can also help in that aspect as well. I think in general, it provides a open space to be open, honest, and vulnerable with your friends. And the game, it really just facilitates that with a system and a storyline. But in like a reality, it's about creating new experiences with people that that like you are cool with.
Absolutely. April, do you have any thoughts on that?
I'm thinking Fenway. So first of all, meeting you at AAS 2 years ago was just a real treat. And you actually set us up with a bunch of DMs and we were role-playing, we did some role-play games. And we had to teach a fair number of folks how to role-play. But like, I remember I had I had a character that had some ridiculous amount of charisma. And so I think I broke your DM. I think I remember him saying, no, I haven't done like this before. But you were talking about role-playing like different aspects. And I had so much charisma. And I said, I'm just going to seduce like every character to help us. And I think I was seducing the NPC. And so suddenly we have like, all sorts of great things going on. And he was like, oh, well, never mind. We're just going to go with this. And there's a sense of like leaning in to like in a playful, really intentional way, leaning into what you're doing. For folks, you probably, most of your audience isn't familiar with the term dialectical behavior therapy, but it's a therapy for folks who may be very seriously suicidal, have really difficult times with relationships. And there's, there are all sorts of icebreaker or like sort of being present exercises. And one of them is very playful, which is like we would literally throw a ball and in the funniest way we could imagine. And it would be to get people to be in the present, to let go, to stop hyper regulating what they're doing. I loved Shareef, what you said about code switching. I am definitely part of the 80s nerd diaspora, but I have a straight job with very serious people. And so I think luckily I hang out with a lot of the tech folks, but like getting to talk about things that are interesting, being playful, like that can be like very relaxing to your nervous system. It's really great for you. And then there's like real connectedness to the people you play with. So many people who do role-playing games have a gaming group and they see them all the time. So when I was coming up in my undergraduate degree, like there was a group of us that gamed together all the time. We had standing characters and we looked out for each other, and we gamed. So we either did role-playing game or other kinds of gaming, probably about 2 nights a week. When we graduated, the coffee shop that we used went out of business because apparently we were gaming there that much. True story. But I'm still friends with these folks these days. And if I'm having something hard in my life that happens, these are the people who would come running. And there is some fantastic research. Once again, I'm super nerdy about all things, including suicide prevention, but that looks at the mental health or mental wellness of like Reddit gaming communities. And that, in fact, not all, like the more that you're online or the more that you game doesn't necessarily make you better or worse, but what they found, it was the health and the supportiveness of the people in your network that really made a difference. So if you're gaming and you're gaming with a reliable, supportive group of friends, you're getting to try things out in some ways by role-playing, being very authentic and doing it really regularly. And that does all sorts of great things for your brain.
Absolutely. Well, you kind of just answered part of my next question, which was kind of mental, where you can see the role play value in mental health treatment. But the second part of my question was, how do you think role play can maintain your self-care? Like, how do you think it can help maintain your self-care?
I mean, I'm not like Shareef. I don't game as a job. So it may be less stressful for me. My family are game players of various sorts, and when you role play or when you do games like that, you kind of have to be present. You have to pay attention. You really can't multitask, and people's nervous systems really need that. I think it also you have a group of people relying on you to start role playing games. Usually they take all day or all night. You take a real break. I think I love technology. I'm not going to be the one that says that it's bad, but it's people can, especially during this pandemic when a lot of people are home, they could really work all the time or have really fractured attention all the time. That's not great for you. And so stopping, connecting with others in playful and intentional ways is just like how I think like how you become like a better human, in my opinion.
Absolutely. Shareef, have you seen it affect your self-care and maintaining, or other people maintaining self-care?
Oh yeah, absolutely. With my group, we game, every Sunday on Twitch, and I look forward to it. If I'm having a tough week or if I'm going through some stuff, I'm kind of like, is it Sunday yet? Is it Sunday yet? And it's not just because, I want to, I mean, part of it is playing the actual game and seeing where the story goes. But the other thing is, hey, I have a dedicated time where I get to chill with people that I love, which the older I get, the harder it is to do. I mean, when I was younger, I was like, hey, I want to hang out with somebody. I mean, this was before texting and that kind of stuff. But, I would call them up on landline or go to their house and we would just hang out. And like, that's it. But like, as you get older, even though there's more ways to communicate with people via like cell phones and social media, all that kind of stuff, people get busy, like all my friends, we're all married. I don't have any kids, but all my friends all have kids, right? So it's harder to say, hey, let's play this video game or let's hang out, right? So to have that kind of dedicated time, that's a huge benefit to my self-care, you know, um, because it's a time where I can feel free. I can experiment. As like April said, with the things like being charismatic or like being, like a really strong character or a really weak character, and deal with the pros and cons of that. It's great exercise for your brain, and I think that that's great for like a self-care. It's like a dedicated brain workout,
Absolutely. I totally 100% agree with that. And this is just kind of a general question to either of you. Do you have a story when it comes to role playing and solving personal issues or issues with another person, either yourself or between players or other people that you've seen?
Oh, wow. Um, like if we're talking about issues between people or a person sort of working through issues while in the game.
Either.
Um, ooh, I'm sorry, I'm thinking of my friends and now I'm thinking of like what stories I can tell.
Not
Um,
a big deal.
um, so the answer is yes. I think I so one of the great things about the way that D&D works is that there is a lot of creative and sort of like free, very free problem solving while having a lot of structured math and structured turn taking. And so sometimes what that means is that people can work things out because there's turn taking and how people make choices or how they're going to talk to
Yes.
each other or the characters that they're going to pick or the solutions they're going to use. I would say when I've seen it done the best, so when people are not kind of doing the yin yang because they're kind of they're frustrated. I think there's like humor. So I would say sometimes people would pick characters and exaggerate problematic traits, pick traits very opposite to who they usually are, um, kind of maybe make jokes or make light or make fun of things that didn't go well in real life. So there's a great way to have an inside joke. And because you're having a structured, playful interaction, that's usually like a much safer way to interact with someone when things maybe were tense that week. So my friends and I who came together in college often also worked on the same committees or in the same offices. So we shared academic and so like of course there was stuff to work through. And I think that's kind of how people did it. And I hope I didn't bogart any answer that you had, Shareef.
No, I can think of a bunch of personal issues that role playing has like helped me with. One is, so like our group, we rotate DMs every 10 episodes. So I'm not the current DM, but I did DM the past 2 times. So I DM'd for the last 20 episodes. And one thing that specifically being the dungeon master has helped me with is, one, being very, very aware of my own personal biases toward things like gender. Because I remember early on, I noticed every time I made a NPC, it was always a guy. I wasn't intentionally doing it, but it was a bias. As a male in this society, we kind of have a bias that, hey, if I'm making a soldier, it's going to be a guy. If I'm making a main villain, it's going to be a guy, right? So I had to think like, hey, I have to make a diverse group of people that reflects the diversity of not only the table but the folks that are going to be watching and society in general, right? It's the same thing that like we asked from all media, from our TV shows, from our books, to our movies, right?
Mhm.
So I had to face the fact that I had this thing that I had to work on where I didn't have this default thing, right? So I had to work really hard on that and really question myself as, why do I think this way, right? And I have to, you always have to make a significant effort to combat some of the systemic stuff, whether it's racism or classism or misogyny or transphobia, all that stuff that we all absorb. Like no matter how woke that we think we all grow up in it and absorb it, and you have to intentionally fight against it. So I feel like, being in like a tabletop has really helped me to to like I think about things like, like gender. Another thing is like pronoun usage. That's something I haven't really had to think about a lot in my personal interactions with like my like group. Not my D&D group, but like my like family group and like my wife and such. But I've had to think about it, because we've had people that we've laid with and like characters that have used like they and them, right? And that's not something I was personally used to. So I like again, it like helped me personally to like be able to like normalize that like usage, so it doesn't seem like it's, "Oh, wow, it's just a thing I've never heard of. What's going on?" So I feel like it's really helped me deal with a lot of like a personal things, and like help me to be more like aware of like how diverse like society is.
It's so interesting that you mentioned that, because my first really regular gaming group in college was much more diverse than where I was raised was not, and so there were definitely a lot of areas of inclusiveness that were happening in the games. So like when I was first getting exposed to some things like where that had been an academic idea, but now it was, someone that I was, sort of collaborating with. And that it's very safe. I think that's the great thing about role playing is it's very safe because you're just playing a game.
Mhm.
So you can try a lot of things out. And as I think about that, there was a lot of trying things out. So, when somebody's 19 and they're, especially if it's the early 90s, and coming out was really hard or really challenging, and a lot of things
Mhm.
about sexuality were very challenging. This was a group that could talk about that kind of stuff. And I mean, I don't think anybody would think anything of that. My teenagers who are their age, to them that seems fairly normative. But for me, I first encountered that as like a part of a role playing game. And I also remember, I think we did this one time. There was a group that I was with that did where characters were assigned based on probability. So they kind of basically based on probability, and we rolled up characters, and you kind of got what you got, and then you had to really play it authentically. And let me tell you what, I remember that being so fun.
Mhm.
Also, I did some things that as I'm older, I realized, there were some things inside me that I didn't understand. But it was a pretty safe place because that was I kind of how I learned some of that.
Mhm.
Absolutely. I think that it can, uh, gaming and the gaming community often is one of the most accepting places that I've encountered. So I for sure. The next question, kind of continuing a similar conversation, but something that would be what not to do, I guess, is uh, April, specifically in your experience or in your mental health professional opinion, what are some phrases, words, situations to avoid as to when role playing, as to not cause harm to oneself or others? Like you said, people are often very accepting, but what do you think might be something that people should avoid?
Wow. It's hard. I saw that question, and it would be really nice if I could give you a pat list. And I think there are folks who can do that because I think it plays a soundbite really well. Um, I'm thinking of my friend in college who was sort of part of our group who attempted suicide in sort of in the middle of our college journey, and who recovered, and who I still know and see on occasion. And speaking of things that we had to work out as a group over those years. And I would say there are also folks who have various kinds of trauma or tough experiences. I would say, number one, we always want to be kind to others, and I think be aware and are really in the moment of things that might be making others uncomfortable or not feel right. Um, but I also I, there is a certain amount of not projecting stigma or badness in
Mhm.
characters. So I think I remember one person at one time picking a character who was really, really a depressed cleric. who was questioning his faith. And the depression impacted sometimes the cleric's ability to do certain things that the game needed doing, but also aided him in other ways. And I think this person was really working through some stuff. So I think that I would say be kind. I think be careful around suicide narratives in games. So there's suicidologists. We talk about eusocial suicide, so suicide as as a way to save others. There are really good adaptive reasons why we've been programmed to be able to put ourselves between harm and someone else, like children, people who are younger, weaker. Um, and that there's a reason to do that. It's really good socially, but to be really thoughtful about those narratives, I would be just really thoughtful about suicide and putting yourself in harm's way narratives. Um, but at the same time, I don't want to take away from the hero's journey or take away from being brave. I would also, okay, so here's where I'm going to say that the research is not clear that there are good ways or bad ways about like tone policing or how you speak about things. But like, do be mindful of dark humor and do be mindful of the group that you're with. Um,
Yes.
I would tell you, gallows humor is fantastic. And you can really use it well. And I work with folks who are suicidal and use it well. But if you're going to be using that, be really mindful of the group that you're with. And if you aren't sure, err on the side of caution. And because social things are, you got to make judgment calls. I said something in a meeting that was really okay between the two of us because I was being playful about something, but somebody thought I was seriously ragging on her when we joke with each other. And she was worried. And so you do use your good social sense and just go check in with people and breaks. Hey, was that okay? I think there's a lot that you can do if you have good relationships, you check in and you stay aware. And I would say it's the skills more than the what you say or what you don't say that are really important.
Absolutely. Um, I think that's a really good point of view because when I was going into this, I was writing the question as hoping that you might give a list of what we should avoid. But I like that point of view even better than getting a list because
Yeah.
it gives people tools to be able to use rather than having to memorize things that they have to avoid.
Yeah, and I'm thinking of my friends, for example, who survived suicide attempts, and like being overly dealt for several of these friends, being overly delicate or overly precious. How you talked about it was really hard, but like also you didn't like there was amount of their humor that was kind of that they weren't okay, and so you didn't like keep going with it. You checked in with them. I really believe that our guts are helpful, and so that if you're worried, like just be like, hey, how'd that go? I wasn't sure how that landed. That will probably matter more than whether you say things right.
Fantastic. I really appreciate that point of view. Something that I have experienced when gaming is that when people don't want to make sure that something isn't talked about, they use like the safety tools. So something that I've run into is something called lines and veils.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so I pulled up the definition for this because I wanted to make sure I got it correct. But it says the lines are the hard boundaries that exclude specified content from the game.
Yes.
No questions asked. This could include anything but common lines, are children being harmed, um, anything sexual or racial discrimination. And then the veils are the softer limits where player is okay with it being included, but it is if it, as long as it isn't explicitly described.
Yes.
Things that are specified as veils will be like hand waved without going into detail on what happened off screen. I've definitely seen those used in games a lot. Shareef, have you used those in your games or used other safety tools in your usual gaming?
Oh, every time. So like Kiana Shaw is one of the creators of the safety toolkit,
Mhm.
which I love. And she has like lines and veils in there. And I think the beautiful thing about lines and veils is they're not static, right? You might think something is not a line, and then you get to a part in a game that you might start to feel super uncomfortable about it. So the DM has to be have that like communicative thing where either you talk about it after, or if you're streaming a game, you can just put in the chat, like, there's like a thing called like an X card as well, where like I can just put an X and like that means immediately stop the current thing and transition onto a new scene. So using these safety tools is like an active thing. Like it's not like we did it once and now that's in stone. That's like the most important thing, because a lot of us are not aware of everything that triggers us, because like some of it is buried like so deep, right? Um, Another important thing is a session zero. So like that means before you have your first session, you like talk about the tone of the game, which to like April's point about like, is there gallus humor? Are we doing dirty jokes? Are we aiming for a kid friendly thing? Talk about those like lines and veils. Like, is there child harming? Is there animal harming? Is there one thing that like actually came up on like rivals are, should we be able to cast like mind control or suggestion or persuasion kind of spells on other players? And we actually had a situation where that did happen. And then through discussion after the game, we decided to ban it because it kind of robbed a player of their agency, right? To like say that they would do this kind of thing because I rolled a die that said that you have to do it. And there's some tables where that's fine, right? But like part of having your safety tool being a very active thing, right, is making sure that you are constantly talking after the game, because those feelings can bleed into real life. And because these people that you're like playing with, you are feeling vulnerable around them, you want to make sure that like you have those like conversations, right? There should never be any judgment if a person just has to take a break, right? Or like leave even during a live show, right? It might be that like a person's like, look, I gotta take a break, or like we gotta pause for like a 5 minutes, all that should be followed. So yeah, I think I would highly recommend to look at like Deanna Shaw's toolkit. It's free. It's just a link to like a Google Drive folder. There's a bunch of awesome stuff in it.
Yeah,
Can I
absolutely.
tell you, I wish more therapists were that intentional.
Yeah, well, there we go. I'm not a therapist, so I don't know.
That's really fantastic that that's become, so, I mean, since I was younger, obviously time has passed, but that's in 20 years, that's become, is it 20, longer, the standard, the standard. That's really beautiful.
I don't know. I mean, I wouldn't say it's the standard. I say we hope it becomes the standard. I say that if you, as I said, it depends on the table. So this free resource is out there. Not everyone takes advantage of it, but I can tell you, I won't play at a table that doesn't take advantage of it, especially being like a African American male. I want to feel safe, right? In like a game where I'm feeling like vulnerable. So I wouldn't feel comfortable playing at like a table that didn't take these things into consideration.
That, I'm sorry, I'm so struck by this because that is a level of consideration and structure so that people can be very, very safe in a very fluid situation that impresses me a lot.
Yeah, it's awesome.
For sure. I know one of my favorite safety tools is like the green, the red, and the yellow cards. So for those of you who are not familiar, green card means you can either show something green on the screen. One of my favorite ways to do it is like I have a couple pencils next to me, so I'll like fidget with a green pencil if I'm saying green card, which means that you're totally okay with what's going on. You can something that it was described as, you can up the intensity of the situation if you feel like it's necessary, or something like that. Or the yellow card is, I'm okay with what's going on right now, but I wouldn't be okay with it if it got more intense. And then the red card is, I'm not okay with what's going on. So that's one of my favorite things before. And I've seen it done with pens and that sort of stuff too. So, April, what do you think? Do you think that could be used in real life? What's your opinion on this?
It is in real life. So, okay. So, what is the show rated? Who's the audience?
We're shooting for PG-13.
All right, so we're going to be PG-13 about this. Thank you. I safety tools and suicide prevention means something a little different. So I was like, so I wonder what this is going to be. So, when you mentioned that I work with folks with borderline personality disorder, and folks with borderline personality disorder often get to that point because two things happen. You have some difficulty with emotional regulation, like if that's biologically based, and then you have something called invalidating environment. And invalidating environment can mean a lot of things, but as you're growing up, your environment doesn't help you understand what's happening, interpret what's happening internally or externally, stand up for yourself effectively. It doesn't help you. What you're being told doesn't actually match what's happening, and it teaches you to mistrust yourself, to be very confused, to have difficulty with boundaries, to ignore when you're uncomfortable. I like to describe it: you're a doormat, you're a doormat, you're a doormat, you're a volcano. And so they can get into relationships of a personal nature that can be very hard to navigate, and also where people can be very easily victimized, re-traumatized. The reason that I talk about this is this disorder is really common. It's one of the most common. People talk about bipolar disorders, but most people that's largely biological. Most folks, in fact, have some other thing going on. And this is one of the common ones. The really scary part is 3 to 10% of those folks with this kind of problem die by suicide. And one of the things that we do in therapy is teach them to pay attention to these cues inside itself: green, yellow, red. We teach them to do these in relationships of a personal nature, because being disconnected with that experience can get you in a lot of trouble and cause you to do things that aren't in your best interest, or then in order to protect something that you could protect with a relatively, like a yellow card, to do like the rage quit a game or something like that. And so having a structure for that, which the type of therapy that I most love to do, dialectical behavior therapy, like teaching people structure, teaching people to check in, and having the person regulate the experience, the dungeon master, whoever's, do we even say it, or we just say DM now?
We say
I don't know.
both.
Right.
It could be DM or GM.
I like GM a little better because now it's like you slide into somebody's DMs and then I'll.
Oh, I see. I get you.
Right. It's my daughter says I should never say that, but having a structured way to have people check in for that. First of all, that's just really good practice to cue you to be aware. And then instead of invalidating environment, what you have is like Shareef, who says, I'm going to my games that I'm running, I'm going to create a structure for everyone to check in about that. That's incredible. That's I almost have goosebumps. Like, that's a really good idea. And a good skill for people to have.
Yeah. I mean, like I brought up, the fact that, when you're a marginalized person, when you're Black, or, if you're not, cis hetero white male, basically, when you go into some of these games, like, people might do things that have these stereotypical tropes on it, and think it's fine. Right. So if I don't have that check-in system, I'm immediately, I'm at edge, right? That somebody's gonna, think that some racist joke is funny, or that some like misogynistic or like transphobic, or or like something that's like making fun of disabled folks or something like that, is like funny, because some people do have that level of like humor and like camaraderie, especially when they're around their like friends. But like, if you give everybody a like avenue to like say, hey, this is what's cool and this is what's not cool, either those folks can walk away or we can have a good time together. So
you're saying that showing up and doing a drow character and then saying that, look, I'm diverse, it might not be well received. I'm sorry.
I mean, look, I have a lot of stories about people that thought they were real funny, and I was horribly offended. So yeah.
So you're saying, yeah, because people might not, they
Mm-hmm.
might not,
Mm-hmm.
everybody's level of development is different.
Yeah, we've had a lot of combos about drows and orcs and how in standard, uh, you know, Tolkien like fantasy, some of the problematic parts of that. So yeah.
Yeah.
Full disclosure, my first character was a drow. Somebody told me to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And that was something that I did not think about until later. And as you talk about how people could navigate that, that just seems like a really smart, strategic way to not only have people check in with themselves, but also to see how what you're doing might impact others.
And that's part of the personal growth I was talking about. The personal effect it can have is to make you more aware of those things, not only in the game, but when you're socializing with people in, you know, in the non D&D world.
Well, and if you're young and you're in a really socially fluid situation, you can make a lot of mistakes, but also what you're telling me is it's a great way for people to get really clear social information to self-correct, and
Yes.
possibly be able to make amends, not
Yes.
all those things, which are
Yep,
really important.
for sure.
Shareef, that is super cool. I've learned something this evening and I am really loving it.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
Fantastic.
I didn't make it up. So like I don't want to take credit for it. But yeah, I mean it's just cool. It's one thing that's made me fall in love with role playing stuff is like that level of sensitivity and like awareness that we're trying to make the standard.
Absolutely. Yes, I definitely think that it's the standard in a lot of the games that I'm in, but I continue to strive to make it the standard in all of the games. So I appreciate people who also um, appreciate that. And kind of the last set of questions for this evening. There's one directed at each of you, but the first is, how have you seen role playing help players find their voice, Shareef? Have you seen that happen before? Kind of goes back to the acceptance idea, but finding their voice, finding themselves, that sort of thing.
Oh, I've seen it happen a lot. I mean, I think in general, when you're in a friend group, there's usually like a loud, dominating person or two, and there tends to be some other people that kind of fall in the background. So they're still in the group, right? But like they kind of fall into those roles, right? When you're in a game, because there's so many different ways you can contribute besides talking, right? I find that people tend to realize that they can have power and influence on a story, even if they're not the person that's always like, I want to charge in first with my sword and do this, do this, do this, right? So, like, seeing people be able to realize that they can contribute in many different ways, I think is one of the best things because especially when I'm gaming in like a one shot with like a new group, right? I go to conferences. Well, in the pre-COVID times, I would go to cons and just play D&D with like a group of strangers, right, at Dragon Con or like that kind of stuff. And like one of the things is just seeing, that people that would naturally be quiet at say a dinner party, right, or like or like that, you will see them like contribute. And it doesn't necessarily mean, oh, they talk more, like that's great, but it means that like they like find ways to help the narrative go and to contribute. But it's also up to the DM to make sure that everyone is involved, right? So like if you notice somebody is standing back, I'll just say like, hey, so like what are you doing? you
Right.
know
Yeah.
or like I'll make sure to shift the narrative a bit so that it focuses a little more on something that they are more interested in, which I would have found out in session zero, right? So like you got to kind of navigate that. I kind of think about it as like a DJ, right? I'm playing to the crowd. If I put a song on that I really love, but the crowd is not feeling it, I got to switch that song, even though I love it, So like you got to play to the table.
For sure. Absolutely. And the back question of that is, April, how do you think that role playing could help people find their voice in themselves, even in the world? It doesn't necessarily have to be gaming, but just kind of, what do you think in that sense?
I'm not going to ask about what the rating for the show is again, but I love the horror in your face. Like, what's going to happen? But really, truly, we all have to figure out who we are in this world, and who we aren't, and that's an evolving process. And there are certain periods of life, especially like adolescence and young adulthood, when many folks start gaming, um, where trying things on and taking the time that you need to really know yourself is one of the most important social and developmental tasks that you have. To do it like as play, like even better. I also think that uh, the wonderful experience of connectedness, social connectedness, is very good for people's well-being, and it helps. As you're close and connected to people, I think you can understand yourself better. And
Yes.
and so I have always seen role-playing games as a real chance to playfully try some things out. Um, uh, I I think we were mentioning that game where your DM. Oh, he was. I don't even remember his name. I wish I could find him again. He was one of the best ones I've ever played with, and I was doing some outrageous things, but that with a real strategy and just having a time with it, things I would just never do in my real life. And what's great is to know what's me and not me. What's great is to be able to try things out in a safe way. What's great is to have had that story, but not that's, I mean, I go to my straight job, right? And you talk about code switching to be able to do this. And for both of those things to, in some respects, be me is a really wonderful synthesis. Like, it's a wonderful experience. I, I just, I like role playing games, math,
Mhm.
fantasy, creativity, social time. Like, what more did you want in a game?
Yeah.
Absolutely. For sure. I think that is an amazing outlook on everything. Is there anything else that either of you wants to add before we close up?
Oh,
Um,
I
no, just as I said before, I really want the safety part of games to be a standard. It's one thing that I've seen more systems that have come out after D&D make it very explicit. Like I just played a games of Kids on Bikes by Renegade Games, and in their manual they dedicate a lot of it to like a safety, which Wizards of the Coast is just now starting to put that in their books, but it's still kind of like it doesn't. I think it should be more of the forefront and woven into the whole thing, especially because we want as many people to feel comfortable playing as like a possible, especially folks from marginalized um, communities for sure. So like I want that safety thing to really be pushed as a standard. That's kind of my closing thing.
I would love for those practices to infiltrate my profession, who you would think would have them. And I would love for the links to those resources to be shared with me. This is
Oh yeah.
wonderful that I can get a tool to take back to my community.
Absolutely. I will put the link to the Shareef just put it in there for you. I will put the link for the Google Drive that Shareef mentioned earlier in the um, description of the video, so that everybody who watches can have access to it as well.
Mhm.
Fantastic. So yeah, I just wanted to say thank you so much to everyone who watched. I hope you enjoyed everything that we talked about and learned some new facts you didn't know regarding mental health and gaming. Thank you, Shareef and April. It was lovely having both of you on here. And I hope we can do it again because I really had a good time and I hope you guys did this too.
This is great. Thank you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Th-
Um,
Thanks to all your audience out there. I hope that I have hope when I think about folks making the world a better place through gaming.
Absolutely. One thing before we go, will you just say where people can find you on the internet? If you don't mind, we can start with Shareef.
Sure. So you can find me at shareefjackson.com, SHAREEF Jackson.com. That has links to all my stuff. I'm an adjunct professor of gaming, so it has links to my classes. It like has links to my YouTube page, to like the Rivals of Waterdeep stuff, which is also like Rivals of a Waterdeep on Twitch and YouTube and Twitter. We stream live on Twitch on Sundays at noon Central. And I'm also under Shareef Jackson on all social networks as well.
Fantastic. So good.
And I have to tell you, since I've had the government job, I've been a little quieter on the socials, but you can always tweet me at Doc Foreman, DOCFOREMAN. I tend to respond to Facebook requests. I'll take emails. I'll take tweets. I love connecting with folks who are passionate about mental health and passionate about making the world a better place.
Fantastic. And everybody else, don't forget to go to jaspersgameday.com, as that is where we have some suicide prevention and mental health resources and more information regarding our next episodes and when they will be put out on the internet. So again, thank you so much, and I look forward to seeing you all soon.